is going on, you guys? This is DerekJ Speaks, and we are here to talk about AEW WrestleDream 2025 live from St. Louis, Missouri. A show that, like many AEW pay-per-views, was very, very long, went way past midnight, all the way at 12:30 in the morning. But, top to bottom, it was still a pretty good show. I would say more positive than negative, although there is some negative, but still mostly positive. And the entire show was built around what took place in the main event, which was an I Quit match between Jon Moxley and Darby Allin, two characters who they have established. It takes a lot to make either man quit. And in this match, it was pure punishment for Darby Allin for majority of it. He suffered a lot of brutality at the hands of not just Moxley himself, but the rest of the Death Riders, mainly Pac and Claudio, the stronger people, and Marina. In a match like this, you had a lot of typical things. You had some chairs, you had some tables. We didn't get thumbtacks or glass or even fire, which are things that I was expecting to pop up in this match. Some of that stuff they were even teasing heading into this match. But we didn't get some of that stuff. We did get skewers. We did get to see Claudio launch Darby out of the ring all the way over by the announce table, crashing onto the announce table. We did see Pac and Claudio bring out these giant jugs of water and a empty tank. They poured the water in the tank, filled it up all the way to the top, and while Marina Shafir was holding down Darby's legs, Moxley was basically drowning this man and shoving his face into the water. So, more attempted murder on an AEW show. What's new? So we had a lot of this. Of course, Darby got some offense in here and there on Moxley, and he was able to take out some of the Death Riders. He had some pepper spray that he used on Yuta and Daniel Garcia. So he was fighting, but despite all this punishment that he was going through, he had welts on his back. He was whipped with a belt at one point. Darby was going through it, but he would not give up. But when all hope seemed lost, that's when the lights went out. And when they came back on, we saw Sting in the ring. And this is a version of Sting that we have never seen in a pro wrestling ring. This is a Sting who has all white hair and an all white beard to match his all white face paint. This is old man Grandpa Sting, but he is still one of the strongest booked characters to ever grace an AEW ring, because Sting, with his bat, was able to take out both Pac and Claudio with a few swings of that bat. He even took out Moxley temporarily, only to toss the bat over to Darby, and then he lifted up Marina Shafir, put her on his shoulders, and walked out. And then as it came down to just Darby and Moxley one-on-one, Darby bashed Moxley with the bat a few times, got him down, and started choking him out with the AEW flag, the same flag that he planted on the top of Mount Everest. He said heading into this match that he was going to choke him out with it, and that's exactly what he did. So he choked him out. He did hit a Scorpion Death Drop, but he choked him out with the flag, went up top, hit a coffin drop, and then locked in the Scorpion Deathlock. And it didn't take long for Moxley to give the verbal submission and say he quit. So Darby Allin gets the win in this main event of this long pay-per-view. The finish right at the end there did seem a little rushed. It's not lost on me that the show was going right, like Darby won, he picks up the flag, he poses in the corner, and they basically go right off the air. So maybe they were pressed for time, maybe they had a hard out at 12:30 a.m. and that was it. Again, I said earlier that I'm surprised that there were certain objects and items not used in this match. Maybe they had some restrictions due to the St. Louis Commission. I don't know. We know certain cities in this country have certain restrictions placed on things that they allowed to take place on these wrestling shows. So maybe there were certain things that they could not do, which, given the things that they actually did do, it is surprising. And Moxley basically quitting immediately. Like, we've heard from Moxley in the build-up to this match and how he's never going to quit and how it's going to take so much to make someone like him quit. You know, the same thing with Darby, but Moxley too. And, you know, in that moment, in a vacuum, when you just look at it isolated like that, to see everything that we've seen these two go through, all the things that we've seen Moxley himself go through, and the fact that he just quit so easily is a bit of an anticlimactic finish. I try to look at it more optimistically in that maybe you can look at it like Moxley is really more talk than action. Like, he could dish out all this punishment, but even a lot of the stuff brought back onto him, he couldn't really take much himself. We saw that at Allin against Hangman, and I guess we saw a version of that here, but I don't know. It felt more like kind of rushing to the ending and pressed for time to go off the air more than an actual full blow off to this feud, which I really hope this is the blow off, because I just don't see any need to go beyond this between Moxley and Darby. This is it here. They main evented this show. Sting appeared. Darby went through all of that brutal punishment, and he still came out on the other side as the winner. I don't really see a need to go beyond this. And hopefully, with Moxley quitting here, maybe the other members of the Death Riders will look at him a little less high and mighty and maybe lose a little respect for him. And we can start speeding up the process of getting to the end of this Death Riders angle. I know, wishful thinking. I said this, along with many others, said this coming out of Allin, hoping that would be the slow decline of this angle. But since then, they have added a member, and they're main eventing shows. They main evented this pay-per-view over the World Championship match, so it's still a very strong angle right now, but we'll see. Hopefully, at least this much between Darby and Moxley can be over. But the match itself, again, I mean, these hardcore matches in AEW, we see them every single week, and we hear the crowds chant stuff like "this is murder" every single week, or at least every other week. It's far too often that we hear and see this kind of stuff, so when you compare it to a lot of these other matches, it's really not that special. But for the story that they were trying to tell here, and with the Sting cameo, honestly, I grade this match a little higher on a curve, mainly for the visual of white-haired Sting pulling out a bat and just beating the hell out of the Death Riders with it. So, as ridiculous as that might be, I still like that moment of it. And yeah, but again, hopefully this is the end for Darby and Moxley. But hopefully this show was not the end for Samoa Joe and Hangman Page, which, based on what happened in the post-match of their championship match, this will not be the end. On this show, Hangman defended the World Championship against Samoa Joe. They had a good match, a good brawl. Nothing too crazy. It didn't go damn near 40 minutes like a lot of Hangman matches have this year. The one with Ospreay, the one last month against Kyle Fletcher. This was a little bit shorter than that, but it was still a very good match. The build-up and the base for why this match took place, very weak and random, but it's Samoa Joe in a World Championship match on pay-per-view. I'm not going to complain. And they had a really good match, which saw Hangman get the win after hitting 3 buckshot lariats. The first 2, Joe couldn't go down, and then he hit that third and final one, and that took down Joe. And after the match, out came the Opps, the other 2/3 of the Trios champions, Powerhouse Hobbs and Katsuyori Shibata, They came out, they helped up Joe, who got a standing ovation. A lot of respect for Samoa Joe here, and he showed respect to Hangman. He shook his hand, he raised his arm, and we thought all was well. And then Joe reared back and laid out Hangman with a clothesline. He started putting the boots to him, and then Hobbs and Shibata joined in, and they all three started putting the boots to him. Hobbs and Shibata held up Hangman. Joe clobbered him in the face with the belt, and then he got him up and hit him with a muscle buster. The now heels, the heel Opps, they left, and the medical staff, they helped Hangman out of the ring to the back. So the Opps turned heel. Samoa Joe, he lost clean, but he got the final word here. He got the last laugh, and he and his fellow stablemates, the Trios champions, they turned heel on Hangman. Is there going to be an explanation for this on TV this week? I doubt it, but you know, it was nice. I can't, again, when it comes to Samoa Joe, there's just certain people who, you know, you just like seeing them in certain positions, and having Samoa Joe not only in the world championship picture, but as a heel again, I can't get mad at that. I can get behind that very easily. As for Shibata and Hobbs, you know, was there a long-term plan behind this? I'm not sure. I imagine this is going to set up a rematch between Joe and Hangman, probably at Full Gear. And in the build-up, we'll get some TV matches with Hangman and Hobbs and Hangman and Shibata. In fact, I think it's very easy to set up a rematch and make Joe even more pissed off at Hangman and give Hangman a reason to get revenge on these guys. This Wednesday night, upcoming this week on Dynamite, well, yeah, this Wednesday as of this recording, we got a Trios Championship match for that show, the Opps defending against the Hurt Syndicate. Now, the Hurt Syndicate, they were victorious in a match on this very show. They beat Ricochet and the Gates of Agony, the Demand, in a tornado match. Now, it was a fairly fine match, you know, had a lot of weapons used too, a lot of tables and chairs and whatnot. Shelton Benjamin, MVP of that match, no pun intended, seeing as how there was an actual MVP of that match, but the most valuable participant, player, whatever, of that match was definitely Shelton Benjamin. He was on fire in that match. But the Hurt Syndicate got the win, and that win granted them a shot at the Trios champions. And I found that to be questionable at that point in the show. But then you fast forward to the post-match angle in the world title match with the Opps turning heel. They are now the heels heading into this match against the babyface Hurt Syndicate. And I could very easily see the Hurt Syndicate walking out with those Trios titles after an assist from Hangman, who might make an appearance, might provide a distraction, and cause the Opps to lose their Trios titles, which will further piss off Joe and will lead to some kind of rematch between the two of them. Now, of course, you still have MJF out there waiting in the wings. He could pop back up and, you know, get his world title match at any point. I think they can save that for World's End, and we can get another Joe Hangman match at Full Gear. So I got no issues with that. Speaking of Full Gear, we have a Women's World Championship match confirmed for Full Gear. But before we get to that, let's talk about two of the women's matches on this show, the two women's championship matches that took place on this show. First one being Kris Statlander defending the Women's World Championship against Toni Storm. And these two, heading into this show, I was looking forward to this match. Coming out of it, I thought they had a really good match. I was expecting a little bit more, but I still thought it was a fun match between these two. Very evenly matched, back and forth. The fans were a little bit quiet. At different points in this show, they were pretty quiet for the first third or so of these matches, and then down the stretch, they really started to get into it. That was the same thing here, but these two, even despite that, they were still having a really good match, and the fans just happened to get more and more into it. But by the end of it, Statlander was able to pull off the win and hit Toni with Saturday Night Fever and retain her championship. So she got the clean win here. And after the match, she was interrupted by the TBS champion, at this point, 10 belts, Mercedes Mone, who came out. She was flunked by some guys who were holding some of her belts and doing her dance. And she told Kris Statlander to get out of her ring. And Kris Statlander left. And I'm like, that's very weird to have your world champion just back down like that. So I was expecting her to come back out. She did, just not in the way that I thought she would. But Mercedes was out there because she was issuing an open challenge to any champion in the world to come out and defend their championship against her and do a title for title match. And so the answer to that challenge came in the form of Mina Shirakawa, the interim ROH Women's Television Champion. That is a statement that not many people really care all that much about. I don't know why the Ring of Honor TV women's title needs an interim champion, given the fact that Red Velvet is currently injured. I don't know why that was necessary, but it is what it is. So we have Mina Shirakawa versus Mercedes Mone on this show. And they got me with a few of the near falls in this match and some of the kickouts, even Mina kicking out of the Monet Maker at one point. So they got me to bite on some of the near falls and close pins here in this match. But in the end, Mercedes, with a backslide, is able to pin Mina and win the interim TV championship and make herself 11 belts Monet. This was not all that necessary. The match was fine. Again, they got me with some of those near falls because Mercedes just this past week surpassed Jade Cargill's record as the longest reigning TBS champion. She is now 509 days plus as TBS champion. So I thought maybe, just maybe, they'll have her drop the championship here. Now that she's broken the record, she went beyond that point. Maybe they'll do something here after that quick interaction between her and Kris Statlander. Maybe Stat will come back out and cost her the match. They didn't do that. Mercedes won, and she now has yet another championship that not a lot of people care about. But Kris Statlander did return. She got back in the ring, and she laid out Mercedes. Now, later in the night, Mercedes was backstage, and she issued a challenge to Kris Statlander, challenging her for her world championship at Full Gear. Now, as of this moment that I'm recording, we do not have a response, so the match is not official, but that challenge is not made unless the match is going to happen, and it's going to happen. And it makes sense. There is a story there. Mercedes even mentioned it. Last year, they had 2 encounters on pay-per-view, and Mercedes got the win both times. So Kris Statlander has yet to beat Mercedes in a one-on-one encounter. So that's her hill to climb heading into Full Gear. My reservations with doing this match is here we go again with Mercedes as a champion. I know she has a whole bunch of belts, but currently the TBS champion. And she is once again challenging for the world championship. We ran into this exact same issue just earlier this year when she won the Owen Hart Cup and she challenged Toni Storm for that championship heading into Allin. And a lot of people were very put off at the idea of Mercedes just winning all of the women's championships, and she's going to win the world title while still TBS champion, going to collect all these belts, and is going to be the forever champion. But that didn't happen. Her and Toni had a great match. Mercedes lost. That was it. She put her focus back on the TBS title. Now, Kris Statlander's champion, and she, that being Mercedes, has now reset her focus back on the world championship. I know the story there is that Kris has not beaten her yet, so in theory, it's like, well, this is now her chance to beat her and get her win finally over Mercedes. I don't know if that is the narrative that they will go with versus the narrative of this is now the second time this year that Mercedes is going to challenge for a world championship on pay-per-view. I find it very difficult to accept the idea that she is going to be unsuccessful at challenging for the world championship 2 times this year while still being TBS champion. Now, if somehow she loses that TBS title between now and then, maybe that might make it sting less, although having her long reign as TBS champion end so abruptly only for her to just win the world championship immediately after Kris Statlander has only held it for like 2 months, that's not really all that appealing either. But I don't know. I guess on one hand, hey, that makes the match very unpredictable. I'm not confident that we're going to see a victory there for Kris Statlander, but we'll see. Now, I mentioned Toni Storm and Mina Shirakawa, 2 losers on this show. Later on in the night, they cut backstage. Renee Paquette was interviewing Toni, and she was there with Mina. Toni said that they both lost everything, but Mina said that they still have each other, and then they hugged. And then right before the main event, they were running down the lineup for Dynamite this week, and in that, they mentioned how they are going to reveal the brackets for the upcoming tournament to crown new women's tag team champions in AEW. I fully expect that Toni Storm and Mina Shirakawa will be a team in this tournament, and I think that this is what this segment was supposed to do. They have both lost everything. Toni has now lost twice. Mina, she got a championship and she just lost it, so now they have each other, and they're going to go after the tag team titles, and they are my early pick to win those tag team titles. Without knowing who all else is in the tournament, I foresee a scenario where they very likely will be the winners. So that's it for that stuff. And to talk about yet another women's match, we had one earlier in the show between Jamie Hayter and Tekla, which was very good. Jamie Hayter got the win, rightfully so. And, you know, the stuff with Jamie and Tekla and the Triangle of Madness and this barrage of baby faces going after them, I'm sure it's all building up to that blood and guts match coming up next month, where I imagine Tekla and her crew will be on one side and Jamie Hayter and a bunch of other baby faces will be on the other. So good match at the early part of this show. And yeah, good to see Jamie Hayter get a win. Good to see just a singles match between 2 women on an AEW pay-per-view with no championship or anything like that involved. That's very rare. So good on them for getting a spot like that. This was also a great night by tag team wrestling. Now, those last 2 matches were very good in their own right. Kris Statlander and Toni Storm, they had a very good match. There was some good stuff on the show, but I think this show was heavily carried by the 2 tag team matches that took place. The first one being for $500,000. The Young Bucks taking on Jurassic Express. I am someone who finds the money matches very goofy. When these random tag matches on TV or on Collision that Tony Khan puts on, and he just puts up the graphic that, oh, this match is for $300,000 or $250,000 or $500,000. I find that to be very goofy and very lazy. However, in this specific instance, it actually makes sense, given that the Young Bucks are broke and are financially irresponsible. Ever since they lost their EVP status, they have been broke. They've come into some money, and then Nick Jackson basically gambled it all away. So now they're broke again. So they really need some money. And honestly, this whole stuff with them has made me more entertained by the Young Bucks than I have been in years. So good on them. So in this case, having the money on the line actually made sense. And the Bucks are going to be broke for a little bit longer because they did lose this match to Jack Perry and Luchasaurus. But what a match it was. You know, I mean, this match took place basically in the undercard. I don't think it necessarily needed to be quite as long as it was. There may have been a few too many kickouts at certain points in the match, but with all that said, it was still a great match. The Young Bucks and Jurassic Express have had great matches in the past, on TV, on pay-per-view. This one really was no exception. This was a great match. Luchasaurus was the absolute star of this match. Luchasaurus was one of the most over guys on this entire show. The fans were clamoring for him every time he was on the apron and he would tag into the match, and all the things he was doing in the match, super over with the crowd. Jack Perry, over, just not as much as Luchasaurus, which really has always been the case with Jurassic Express. And you know what to expect with the Young Bucks. So they had a very great match here. But in the end, it was the countdown to extinction that put away Matt Jackson to give the win to Jurassic Express. So the boy and his dinosaur win the $500,000, and the Young Bucks are still broke. Now, after the match, they offered to shake the Bucks' hand. They even offered them a little stack of cash, but out came members of the Don Callis family to put the boots to Jurassic Express. The Young Bucks stood there, contemplated, and then left. And as they were leaving, out came Kenny Omega, who confronted them. They still left anyway, and Omega made the save, and the babyfaces cleared out the heels and stood tall. So, once again, Kenny Omega is attacking members of the Don Callis family who had nothing to do with putting him on the shelf heading into All Out. So, that's very funny. But here, it was good to see Jurassic Express back. Jack Perry, they tried with him as a singles heel and scapegoat stuff. It didn't work. It wasn't resonating with people, not enough people at least. So putting him back with the dinosaur, who I'm just happy to see be alive after what he went through last year, is just great to see him alive and mobile. It's great to see him back in the ring. So that's great. But this was a really fun match, and I don't know where this is necessarily going. They look to be teasing a face turn for the Bucks. I don't know about that, but we'll see how it plays out. But yes, this was a very good tag team match, only matched by the other great tag team match on this show, which was for the AEW World Tag Team titles. Brodidio defending against Konosuke Takeshita and Kazuchika Okada. And of course, Takeshita and Okada, they have their own thing going on. A lot of dissension between the two of them. We saw bits and pieces of that in this match until it really blew up towards the end. But this was yet another great match. If the Young Bucks Jurassic Express match was probably the best match of the night, this was probably right behind it. This was fantastic. These two teams had a match on TV not too long ago. That was a great match. This one, just as great. And I genuinely could not predict how this was going to go, although the outcome shouldn't have been that much in doubt, given how hard they are pushing the back and forth dissension between Takeshita and Okada. And like I said, they did tease that throughout the match, but it really didn't play a pivotal role until towards the end, when Bandito was set up to be hit with a Rainmaker from Okada, but when he ducked it, Okada ended up connecting on Takeshita and took his head off. And instead of looking shocked and appalled, Okada stood there looking down at Takeshita, laughing, and even subtly gave him the middle finger. So I thought that was funny. But Okada wasn't laughing for much longer because he was at the mercy of Bandito and Brody King. Bandito came into this match with an injured shoulder. Not sure if it's legit or not, but that's the story they're going with. And he was basically the one-armed man throughout this entire match. And him being the one-armed man actually played into the finish, because as Brody King dove out to the outside and took out Takeshita, Bandito hit Okada with a one-armed 21 plex and got the win. So Brodidio retained their tag team titles, and Bandito pinning Okada has granted him a shot at the Unified Championship. So that match is official over Dynamite this week too. So good on him and good on this match. This was great. So the 2 tag team matches on the show really highlighted how far the AEW tag team division has risen back up. For a while there, it wasn't as focused on, it was kind of dead, to be honest with you. But now, with Jurassic Express coming back and Brodidio really popping off as well as they have, that has reignited tag team wrestling here. And even the beginning of the show was a good highlight of tag team wrestling because, of course, we had the 0-hour pre-show, the tailgate brawl that aired on TNT. The final match on the pre-show was between Jet Speed and FTR, and their match bled into the beginning of the pay-per-view. Now, I saw a few reactions to this, mixed reactions, to say the least. I didn't necessarily have an issue with it. I thought it was a different way of starting the show, and, it helps that it was actually a good match between Jet Speed and FTR. Those 2 teams are really good, so it's not much of a shock that they had a really good match. It was pretty good on the pre-show. It got even better on the main card, and FTR got the cheap win when I think it was Kevin Knight tried to suplex Dax over the top rope off the apron, and Dax slammed onto him. Stokely is on the outside holding down Kevin Knight's legs, so Dax gets the pin. Cheap win for FTR, but what else is new? So if you include that along with the other 2 tag team matches on the pay-per-view, very good night for tag team wrestling. So good stuff there. And so we covered a lot of this stuff, and I think the only remaining championship match to discuss was the TNT championship match between Kyle Fletcher and Mark Briscoe. Match number 5 between these two. To be honest with you, I don't have a whole lot of memory of their first 4 matches. I know one of them was in the Continental Classic last year, and Mark Briscoe pinned Kyle Fletcher, and that was a big deal because Fletcher was like at the top of the leaderboard back then. So that was a big upset win there. But from what I can remember, their matches have been good, but just nothing overly grand or special. And this one, same difference. It was something I do remember about a lot of their previous matches, especially some of the ones on pay-per-view, is that they take place, they don't necessarily belong on the pay-per-view, and the match itself, while good, is a little long and doesn't need to be as long as it was. I remember that earlier in the year, I think they had a match on a pay-per-view, and that was the case here too, where it was a good match. These two have good chemistry, but just for an undercard match, it does not need to go as long as it did. But the right man won. I mean, Kyle Fletcher. He hit a brainbuster and only got a near fall, but after punishing Briscoe a little bit more and then hitting him with a brainbuster on the top turnbuckle, that finally was enough to grant him the victory. So Kyle Fletcher is still the TNT champion. Mark Briscoe, he got that big win over MJF at All Out. Hasn't really done much for him. It got him this championship match, but he lost, and now I don't really see what's left for him to do, really. But, it is what it is. But that's the show. Now, and to circle back to Kyle Fletcher, maybe now, as we head into full gear, Kenny Omega will finally set his sights on Kyle Fletcher, seeing as how Kyle Fletcher is the one who initially put him through a table last month. You would think Kenny Omega, with him being as pissed off about the Don Callis family as he is, maybe he will set his sights on one of the leaders of this faction, and we'll get Kenny Omega and Kyle Fletcher. I just think that'd be a great match. Now, I have read the reports about Kenny Omega. He's not doing the best health-wise. He is pretty banged up, so, maybe they don't go in that direction, but do the match and give Kyle Fletcher the win. That's what I have to say about that. We all know Omega's not going to face Andrade. I don't think anybody in AEW is going to face Andrade for about a year, if you have kept up with that story this week. So, sucks for Andrade, although he should have known better. But even still, if it turns out that it is a year again before we see him, that's pretty petty on WWE's part. Even if they're within their rights, it is pretty petty. It'll be interesting to follow that story, though, especially if it ends up leading to court, because I don't think that little contract there is going to hold up too much in a court of law, but we'll see how far they go. But that's a whole different story. It does not have anything to do with this pay-per-view. This pay-per-view had nothing to do with Andrade. And for this pay-per-view, I thought it was pretty good. Again, very long. I wish AEW would be more selective with some of these shows and how long they go. If you want to have All In and All Out and Double or Nothing and Revolution, those bigger shows, those tentpole shows, be really long and be 4.5 hours or 5 hours, that's fine. But something like Dynasty and WrestleDream, they really should be shorter than that. I'm sure if I look at this card, I can pick out certain matches that probably didn't need to take place, or at least some matches that could have or should have been shorter than they were. But that's what you get with these AEW pay-per-views. You either love it or hate it, or fall somewhere in between. And I kind of fall somewhere in between. There was enough good, solid action to keep me interested and keep me from not hating the show. And coming out of the show, I am interested in seeing where some of these directions are going. Mainly the Hangman and Samoa Joe and the Opps stuff. Interested to see where that goes. And I'm hoping that Darby Allin and Jon Moxley will be kept far, far away from each other going forward. But that is it for me on this review here. If you like what you heard, like what you saw, hit that like button, subscribe, comment down below, all that good stuff. Follow me on Twitter/X at DerekJ Speaks. Next time I'm here, it's not guaranteed, but I very likely will be talking about the next WWE Saturday Night's Main Event show on November 1st. Now that things have been shaken up a little bit in WWE with the whole Seth Rollins thing, Jacob Fatu being out, so now Drew and Cody are doing their thing. Very interested to see what kind of card they put together for that show and what the outcomes of some of these potential matches on that show can be. So I'll be following that show closely, and depending on what happens there, I might be busting out a review. So stay tuned to this channel and, of course, my social media platform, and I will keep you guys updated there. But until next time, thanks for listening. Check you later.